Daniel was still being carried on the shoulders of his men when his helmet crackled. The cheering around him faded slightly as the comm channel cut through. Captain Mercer. Daniel recognized the voice immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Avery. The tone was different now, professional, controlled. No trace of contempt from earlier. Daniel lowered himself down from the soldiers of the men. Go ahead, Colonel. Avery's voice came down through steady and clear. Captain, I need to update you on the situation. Daniel listened. You are currently the only unit on the mountain. Daniel frowned slightly. Repeat? All other assault units were repelled during their advances. A short pause. The air corridor closed behind your landing when enemy anti-air systems reactivated. Daniel looked around the ridgeline. Smoke still drifted from destroyed bunkers. Avery continued. My battalion never deployed by air. We are mobilizing on foot from the valley base. Daniel nodded, even though Avery couldn't see him. Understood. We're coming for you. A short pause. Hold your position. The line went quiet. Then Daniel's visor flashed. An AI tactical update filled his display. Blue and red markers spread across the mountain map. His stomach tightened. His company was a single blue dot, and surrounding it, enemy units were converging from every direction. Daniel exhaled slowly. Well, above them the sky suddenly erupted. High-altitude explosions flashed across the clouds. Enemy drone swarms poured into the airspace, but seconds later anti-air batteries from the valley base opened up. Missiles streaked upward. Autocannons thundered. The sky turned into a violent storm of metal and fire. Daniel watched it briefly. Then another voice broke across the channel, deep, commanding. The division general. Captain Mercer. Daniel straightened instinctively. Sir. The general spoke without ceremony. I want you and your company to understand something. His voice carried genuine weight. You men have accomplished something extraordinary today. Daniel glanced down the line. Many of his soldiers were already checking weapons and tending wounded. You are heroes. The general continued. We will maintain air control above your position, but you must prepare for a ground counterattack. A pause. You will be reinforced. We are coming. The line went silent. Daniel felt the adrenaline surge back into his bloodstream. All right, he said calmly into the company channel. New orders. Strip the enemy. The men moved instantly. Fallen enemies were searched quickly. Rifles, magazines, grenade, food packs, water flasks, everything useful. Men ate and drank on the spot like wolves. Weeks of discipline replaced by the simple instinct to fuel up before the next fight. Daniel watched the ridgelines. The AI markers showed enemy units closing. Rearm with whatever you can carry. Soon, Auxiliary Company Bravo was armed with a mix of American and enemy weapons. Daniel began organizing the defense. Perimeter formation. Use the bunkers. Trenches if you can find them. The captured enemy positions gave some cover, but large parts of the ridge were exposed. The men improvised. Sandbags, ammo crates, broken stone, even the bodies of the enemy fighters stacked into barricades. No one hesitated. War had stripped away hesitation hours ago. Soon the perimeter was set, a rough ring of defenders overlooking every slope of the mountain pass. Daniel stepped into the center and spoke to the entire company. His voice came calm through every helmet. Well, a few nervous laughs. We're surrounded. More laughter now. Daniel continued. But here's the good news. A pause. When you're surrounded, you can shoot the enemy in every direction. The men laughed louder this time. Tension broke. Daniel smiled slightly. Let's make them regret climbing this mountain. The enemy came fast. First the machines. Small suicide drones crawled across the rocks like insects. The first one detonated against the barricade near Sergeant Coe's squad. The explosion tore two men apart instantly. More came, dozens. Auxiliary rifles blasted them out of the air. Some still got through. Explosions ripped open parts of the line. Smoke filled the trenches. Then the human assault followed. Fresh fighters, fanatics. They charged uphill screaming battle cries, completely fearless. Gunfire erupted across the perimeter. The fighting became immediate, violent, point blank. Daniel ran the entire line, machine gun roaring, grenades flying. "Hold that flank! Good shooting, Mallory! Stay with me!" He shouted the names of every man he passed, encouraging, driving them forward. Brick stayed beside him the whole time. The shotgun thundered again and again. Enemy fighters dropped at terrifying range. Above them, the sky remained a chaotic battlefield of drones and missiles. But down on the mountain, it was pure infantry war. Then Daniel saw it. A section of the line collapsed. Enemy fighters poured through a gap between two destroyed barricades. "Breach!" Brick stepped forward to engage, and was hit. A burst of rounds slammed into his chest and shoulder. The giant man collapsed instantly. "Brick!" Daniel slid beside him. Brick was still breathing, but unconscious, badly wounded. Daniel grabbed the shotgun and Brick's hands, then lifted his machine gun again. Both weapons loaded, both ready. The enemy fighters were already flooding through the breach. Daniel stood and charged. He fired both weapons at once. Machine gun hammering, shotgun blasting. Enemies fell in a line ahead of him. They hadn't expected a single man to rush into them. Daniel pushed forward relentlessly. The strain on his body was catastrophic. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, bile rose into his throat. He vomited mid-charge, but he never stopped firing. Point blank, enemy after enemy fell before him. The line of attackers faltered, confused, stunned. This one man was cutting through them like a storm. Daniel roared wordlessly and pushed forward another 10 yards, then another. Finally, the breach closed. The attackers broke. The line stabilized. Daniel staggered, barely standing. Then suddenly, gunfire erupted behind the enemy. Daniel looked up. New blue markers appeared across his visor. Friendly forces. Avery's battalion. The infantry had reached the mountain. They slammed into the enemy from the opposite side. Caught between two forces, the attackers collapsed quickly. Within minutes, the ridge fell quiet again. The enemy retreated down the slopes. Daniel lowered both weapons slowly. Smoke drifted across the battlefield. The mountain pass remained in auxiliary hands. Behind him, Avery's infantry moved up through the trenches. The reinforcements had arrived. And against every expectation, the auxiliaries had held the mountain. The mountain was quiet again. Smoke drifted across the shattered ridge as the sun began to dip behind the peaks. Lieutenant Colonel Avery's infantry battalion moved quickly across the pass, securing bunkers, checking trenches, and establishing defensive positions. Their professionalism was immediate and precise. Medics followed close behind them. The wounded auxiliaries retreated first. Tourniquets tightened, painkillers injected, field bandages replaced with proper trauma dressings. Daniel sat against a rock while a medic briefly checked him over. "You hit?" Daniel shook his head. "Just tired." The medic stared at him. "You should be dead." Daniel didn't respond. Helicopters returned once the airspace stabilized. The wounded were loaded carefully onto stretchers. Brick was among them, his chest wrapped thick with bandages, his breathing steady but shallow. Daniel stood beside the stretcher as they lifted him. Brick's massive frame barely fit inside. "See you soon," Daniel said quietly. The helicopter lifted away, carrying Brick and dozens of other wounded men back to the valley base. For the first time since the battle began, Daniel's surviving company finally relaxed. They dropped their weapons, helmets came off, gear hit the ground. Fresh water and rations packed arrived from the infantry's supply teams. Men ate slowly, hands still shaking from adrenaline. Some laughed, some cried quietly, others simply stared at the mountains. Daniel walked among them, names he knew. Lucky Ramirez, still alive, grinning through a torn sleeve. Doc Feldman, assisting in treating the wounded. Caleb Whitaker, not a scratch on him. They hugged each other, shook hands, clapped backs, but there were many names that did not answer roll call anymore. Empty places in the circle. Daniel felt each one. As the auxiliaries rested, Lieutenant Colonel Avery approached. Daniel began to stand. "Sir," Avery raised a hand. "Stay where you are, Captain." Daniel hesitated, but remained seated. Avery knelt beside him in the dirt. For a moment the two men simply looked at each other. Then Avery extended his hand. Daniel shook it. Avery spoke plainly. "You're going to win a very big citation for this." Daniel shook his head slightly. "My men did the work." Avery glanced down across the pass. "They did," Avery agreed. "But you led them there." Daniel gestured towards the slopes. "And your battalion saved us." Avery shrugged. "You held the mountain." For the first time since they had met, Avery's expression carried something close to respect. Over the next several hours, more units poured into the central pass. Artillery crews, engineers, mountain infantry. The captured ridge transformed rapidly into a fortified position, a permanent foothold inside the enemy's defensive line. Once the situation stabilized, the remaining auxiliaries were evacuated back to the valley base. The helicopters lifted them off the mountain they had taken. Many men slept during the flight. Others simply stared out the open doors. The next few days were quiet. Rest, food, medical treatment. Daniel spent most of his time in the med bay. Brick lay in a reinforced hospital bed surrounded by machines and surgical equipment. When he finally woke up 3 days later, his voice sounded rough. "What did I miss?" Daniel smiled. "You took a nap." Brick lifted his arm. The forearm was now partially mechanical. He remained it with fascination. "Huh." He flexed the metal fingers. "Well, that's pretty cool." Daniel laughed. Brick grinned. "Told you I always liked machines." Daniel also visited the morgue. Rows of flag-covered stretchers waited quietly. He walked down each line slowly, checking names, confirming identities, making sure every man from his company was accounted for. They were, each one. Weeks later, the bodies would be flown home, but Daniel made sure they were remembered first. Several weeks passed. The surviving company healed. The wounded improved. Brick returned to duty faster than expected. "Half robot now," he joked proudly. The company numbers were smaller now, much smaller, but they were still standing. Then Daniel received a summons, division headquarters. The general waited inside. He didn't waste time. "Captain Mercer," Daniel stood at attention. "Your actions during the assault and subsequent defense have been reviewed." The general slid a folder across the desk. "You've been approved for the Medal of Honor." Daniel blinked once. The general continued. "Your men are receiving a significant number of decorations as well. Silver stars, bronze stars, commendations." Daniel nodded slowly. "They earned them." The general leaned back. "There's more." Daniel waited. "You're being promoted." The general smiled slightly. "You're skipping, Major. Effective immediately. Lieutenant Colonel." Daniel remained still. "You will command a full auxiliary battalion." Reinforcements were already arriving. Hundreds of new contract soldiers, untested, untrained. The general studied Daniel. "I reviewed the entire battle. You were engaged almost constantly. You personally accounted for more enemy combatants than anyone on the field." He paused. "And you never took a single wound." Daniel simply nodded. "I had good men around me." 1 month later, the battalion gathered for the ceremony. Rows of auxiliary soldiers stood in formation. Some were veterans from Daniel's original company. Many were brand new recruits. They watched carefully. The wounded men stood among them. Brick stood at the front, his mechanical arm polished bright. Medals were awarded first to the company veterans: silver stars, bronze stars, purple hearts. Men who had fought together on the mountain now stepped forward one by one to receive recognition. Finally, the general stepped to the podium. "Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Mercer." Daniel walked forward. The entire battalion watched. The general pinned the medal carefully onto his uniform. The Medal of Honor. For a moment, the valley base was completely silent. Then the battalion erupted. Cheers, applause. Brick was shouting the loudest. "That's our dad!" Daniel smiled slightly. The metal rested heavy against his chest, but his eyes were already on the new soldiers standing in formation. Hundreds of men, waiting, watching. Soon they would follow him into battle. And Daniel Mercer, former private, former chiropractor, former debtor, was now the commander of an auxiliary battalion. The new battalion took shape quickly. Hundreds of fresh auxiliaries arrived over the following weeks, men from every corner of the country and every kind of life imaginable. Some were young and reckless. Some were middle-aged like Daniel and had been when he first assigned his contract. Some had already lived several hard lives before stepping onto the transport. Word traveled through them faster than official orders ever could. Stories. Stories about the Central Pass. Stories about the company that took the mountain alone. Stories about the captain who ran through enemy lines firing 2 guns while vomiting from exhaustion. By the time the last transport arrived, Daniel Mercer had already become something else. A legend. Daniel ignored it. Instead, he walked the barracks every day. He made sure to meet every new soldier, every one. He asked their names, where they came from, why they had signed the contract. Some were surprised he even asked, but he listened to each of them the same way he had listened to his original company, carefully, without judgment. The veterans from Company Bravo naturally filled leadership roles. The survivors who had taken the pass, men like Lucky, Ramirez, Whitaker, and Feldman, were promoted into senior NCO positions across the battalion. They carried Daniel's philosophy with them: steady leadership, looking after their people, and always staying calm. At Daniel's recommendations, Brick Kowalski received the rank of first sergeant. The day the promotion was announced, Brick looked down at the new stripes on his sleeve, then at Daniel. "Well?" He scratched his mechanical arm. "I appreciate the pay raise." Daniel laughed. "You earned it." Brick shrugged. "Also, I get to yell at people now." "You already did that." "Yeah, but now it's official." Mail call arrived again one evening. The battalion gathered in the massive barracks. Excitement filled the room as tables were distributed. Men laughed. Some wiped away tears. Others immediately started writing back home responses. Daniel received his tablet quietly. One message, Elena Mercer. He looked at the name, then deleted it, without reading. He returned the tablet and walked back through the barracks. No one asked. A week later, Daniel received another summons, division headquarters. The general stood beside a large operational display when Daniel entered. "Lieutenant Colonel Mercer." "Sir?" The general gestured toward the map. The entire Valley of Death filled the screen. Red enemy positions stretched across the mountain system. "Your battalion will return to the Central Pass." Daniel nodded. "Understood." "You will be the tip of the spear in the next operation." The general zoomed out on the map. "Objective, secure the entire valley." Blue units appeared across the display. Multiple divisions, air support, artillery, engineering units. The general's voice remained calm. "If we secure this valley," he tapped the map, "we control the entire region. Supply lines, air corridors, strategic movement routes. The war itself could shift here." Daniel studied the terrain carefully. The general folded his arms. "I'll be honest with you." Daniel waited. "I admire what you and your men did." The general looked directly at him. "But that doesn't change what the auxiliaries are for." The words were not cruel, just truthful. "You go first. You break the enemy so the regular forces can move forward." Daniel nodded. "I know, sir." The general stepped forward and shook his hand firmly. "You are the best auxiliary officer I have ever seen." A brief pause. "Good luck, Lieutenant Colonel." Daniel could see it clearly in the general's eyes. He didn't expect to see him again. That night, the battalion buzzed with energy. Word of the upcoming operation had spread already. Men packed gear, checked weapons, talked excitedly. Some of the younger soldiers were especially eager. "Tomorrow we're going to smash 'em. Can't wait to get my first one. About time we saw some action." Even some of the older men smiled at the energy. Daniel stood near the center of the barracks. Eventually someone shouted, "Colonel's here." The noise quieted. Hundreds of soldiers gathered around him. Daniel looked across the room. He could feel their excitement, their pride, their confidence, and he understood it. He nodded slowly. "I like the energy." Some of the men grinned. "You should be proud of what you've become." He gestured towards the room. "This battalion is strong." A pause. "But listen to me carefully." The men leaned forward slightly. "Tomorrow is not about glory. Not about kills." The room grew quieter. "It's about staying alive." He pointed around the circle. "You watch each other. You move together. You stay calm." His voice remained steady. "No heroics, no stupidity, just discipline." Daniel smiled faintly. "If we do that, we all come home." The room stayed silent for a moment. Then someone shouted, "Yes, sir." Others followed. The battalion's excitement didn't disappear, but it changed. From reckless eagerness to focused readiness. Daniel looked across his soldiers, hundreds of men waiting for tomorrow, and he knew exactly where he would be when the battle started, right at the front, just like always. The battalion loaded before dawn. The AI transport ships sat on the runway like dark metallic insects, engines humming softly while the auxiliaries filed aboard. 4 companies, hundreds of men, all of them armed, all of them quiet. Inside the transport bays, the battalion strapped into crash sheets while the AI briefly filled their helmet displays. Operational update. A 3-dimensional map of the mountain range appeared across every visor. Enemy forces heavily entrenched across the ridge system overlooking Primary Valley Pass. Red icons dotted the ridgeline. Bunkers, machine gun nests, drone launch pits, anti-air positions. The pass below cut through the mountains like a narrow scar. Battalion insertion will occur here. A blue landing zone flashed just before the pass. Objective, secure the ridge and open vehicle access through the valley. Daniel watched the map carefully. Everything depended on taking the heights. Daniel had divided the battalion into 4 companies. 3 would climb the ridge, 1 would take the pass itself. The men in the pass had spent the night preparing differently than the others. Heavy armor plates, full helmets, shield modules. Their mobility came from the machines now crouched beside them. Robo-dogs. 4-legged mechanical carriers normally reserved for elite reconnaissance units. Each one unfolded from a compact backpack unit. When deployed, they became powerful quadruped machines capable of running quickly across the uneven terrain. They were extremely expensive and normally never issued to auxiliaries. But when Daniel submitted the requisition request, the supply officer had simply stared at the paperwork, then looked at Daniel's uniform, the Medal of Honor pinned there. The officer nodded. "Give him the dogs." A few signatures were added, some paperwork quietly altered, and suddenly the auxiliaries had cavalry. The company assigned to the pass was led by Captain Aaron Pike, a former financial analyst who had buried himself in debt after a failed tech startup. Pike stood beside his men as the robo-dogs powered up. "All right," he said calmly. "Today we ride." The transports dropped low over the mountains. Wind howled through the open doors. 30 seconds to landing. Daniel stood near the ramp, machine gun ready, 3 companies behind him, Brick beside him. "Just another morning," Brick muttered. Daniel smiled slightly. "Just another morning." The ships touched down. The battalion poured out. Captain Pike's company deployed first. The robo-dogs unfolded and lowered themselves for riders. Heavily armored auxiliaries mounted the machines. Then the formation surged forward into the pass. Enemy fire erupted almost immediately. Machine guns hammered down the ridges. Rockets streaked through the air. But the robo-dogs ran fast across the flat, broken terrain. Armor plates absorbed much of the incoming fire. Even so, men fell. Private Nolan, Corporal Gentry, new names already joining the dead. Still, the armored cavalry pushed deeper into the pass, drawing the enemy's attention, drawing their fire, exactly as Daniel intended. Meanwhile, Daniel led the other 3 companies up the mountain slopes. They carried lighter gear and enormous quantities of ammunition, the same strategy that had won the Central Pass. They reached the first ridgeline and opened fire immediately. Hundreds of rifles and machine guns erupted, a storm of bullets tearing across the enemy positions. Then Daniel gave the order, "Pull back!" His company retreated visibly, falling down the slope, deliberately sloppy, looking like a force breaking under pressure. The enemy reacted instantly. They surged out of their bunkers, shouting, charging downhill to pursue what they believed was a routed battalion. They rushed straight into the trap. The 2 concealed auxiliary companies opened fire from both flanks. The charging enemy was caught in a devastating crossfire. Entire waves of attackers collapsed in seconds. The slope turned into chaos. Daniel rose from cover. "Forward!" Now the entire battalion surged uphill. 3 companies advanced across the ridge, weapons blazing continuously. They fired every weapon they carried, rifles, machine guns, grenades, sidearms, a rolling wall of gunfire sweeping enemy positions. Bunkers shattered, trenches overrun. Daniel led the charge, always first, always moving. His machine gun cutting down targets with brutal precision, but the enemy was dense across the ridge, and well prepared. Auxiliaries fell constantly. Sergeant Davila, Private Henson, Corporal Valez, names disappearing in the assault. Still the battalion kept climbing. Then the radio came alive. "Pike to Mercer." Gunfire thundered behind his voice. "We made it through." Captain Pike's armored company had reached the far side of the ridge. They now attacked the enemy flank. The defenders were suddenly caught between 2 advancing forces. Daniel's companies pushing from the front, Pike's armored troops firing from behind. The enemy lines collapsed into confusion. The ridge was becoming a trap. After hours of brutal fighting, the gunfire began to slow. Men checked magazines, empty, belts gone, grenades spent. Both sides had burned through nearly everything. Daniel stood among the smoke and rubble. The enemy fighters gathered across the final defensive line, equally exhausted, equally armed with almost nothing. Daniel stepped forward slightly. He raised one hand. "Lay down your weapons." His helmet translated his words automatically. The enemy shouted back in a language he didn't understand, but the gestures were unmistakable, defiant, insulting. Brick side beside him. "Well," Daniel nodded. "All right." The final fight erupted instantly. Both sides charged. Without ammunition, the battle became primitive. Rifles swung like clubs. Knives flashed. Men grappled in the dirt. Daniel smashed an enemy fighter aside with the butt of his machine gun. Another rushed him. Daniel drove the rifle stock into the man's jaw. Bone cracked. The man collapsed. The fighting became savage, personal, close enough to feel breath. Many auxiliaries vomited from the shock of it. Still, they kept fighting. Brick tore through attackers with terrifying strength. Captain Pike's armored company slammed into the final enemy pocket from behind. The defenders finally broke. Minutes later, silence fell across the ridge. The mountain range overlooking the pass now belonged to the auxiliaries. The surviving battalion stood among the wreckage, exhausted, bloody, but alive. Below them, the valley pass stretched open. For the first time, vehicles could move through the entire region. Daniel stood at the front of the ridge. He had been the first man to fire, the first man to charge, and once again, he was still standing. Behind him, the battered auxiliary battalion looked down across the valley and realized they had just changed the course of the war in the mountains. Within weeks, the mountains transformed. What had once been a narrow, deadly corridor was now the busiest route in the entire region. Convoys stretched endlessly through the pass, armored vehicles, supply trucks, artillery carriers, engineering units. The road never stopped moving, day and night. The soldiers began calling it something new, Valley Forge. Not officially, but the name stuck, because what had been forged there wasn't just a road, it was a turning point. With the mountains secured, the skies opened, American aircraft filled the airspace. Fighters, bombers, recon drones, heavy transports, they streamed inland towards the enemy heartland. The war had shifted, and everyone knew it. Daniel's battalion had been evacuated from the ridge and returned to the main valley base. For the first time in months, they rested. Real rest, hot meals, showers, medical treatment, sleep without alarms. Replacements arrived steadily. Fresh auxiliaries filling the ranks where veterans had fallen. Promotions followed. Decorations too. Silver stars, bronze stars, purple hearts. The veterans of the battalion now wore their ribbons openly. 2 brutal battles had transformed them into something else entirely. And something else had changed them too. The way other units treated them. Gone were the cold looks. Gone were the missing salutes. Now when Daniel walked across the base, soldiers snapped to attention. Privates, corporals, sergeants, officers, all of them saluted. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The auxiliaries had earned their place. One afternoon, Daniel received another summons. Division headquarters. He walked into the familiar office and snapped a salute. "Sir," the general raised a hand. "That won't be necessary anymore." Daniel paused. The general walked around his desk holding something small in his hand. A single silver star. He placed it gently on the desk. "You're skipping, Colonel." Daniel said nothing. "You are now," the general slid the star across the desk, "an auxiliary brigade general." Daniel looked down at the insignia. The general smiled. "I've never seen anything like it." His voice carried genuine wonder. "A contract soldier. From debtor to brigadier." He shook his head slightly. "What a beautiful miracle." Daniel remained quiet. The general stepped forward and saluted him. A full, sharp salute. "Thank you." Daniel returned the salute. "For ending the war in the valley." The general extended his hand. Daniel shook it. "We can all move on now." Before leaving, Daniel returned to the barracks one last time. Word spread quickly. The entire battalion gathered. Men he had fought beside, men he had led into hell, men who now looked at him with pride. Brick stood beside him, his new rank insignia gleaming. Sergeant Major of the Auxiliary Brigade. Daniel had insisted he come with him. Brick looked down at the new stripes earlier that day. "Sergeant Major, huh?" Daniel smiled. "Big pay raise." Brick grinned. "Well, now I definitely appreciate it." Daniel turned to the battalion. His voice stayed calm. "I'm heading back to the United States." Some murmurs moved through the crowd. "Strategy meeting." He nodded toward them. "You're in good hands here." He looked at the senior NCOs. Lucky, Ramirez, Whitaker, Feldman. "I'll see you again when the next assignment comes." They nodded. None of them doubted it. Before Daniel boarded the transport, mail call happened again. The barracks filled with the usual excitement, tablets passed hand to hand, men smiling, reading messages from home. Daniel received his tablet. One message. Elena Mercer. He stared at the name for a moment, then deleted it. He handed the tablet back and walked out to the runway. A sleek private transport waited on the tarmac. engines already humming. Brick climbed aboard behind him. "Back to America," Brick said. Daniel nodded. The aircraft lifted into the sky, rising above the valley. Below them, Valley Forge stretched across the mountains, endless convoys moving through the pass. The war continuing. But Daniel Mercer was no longer just a soldier. He was now Brigadier General of the Auxiliary Brigade. Brick looked over at him. "You know." "What?" "Dad's gonna run the whole war next." Daniel smiled faintly. "We'll see." The transport climbed higher, carrying them back across the ocean.